Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear student teachers, Assalamu alaikum. I am Rashid Salim with lecture number 30 of Functional English 1. In this lecture, we are going to describe visual organizers. And I think I have mentioned visual organizers earlier. If you can recall, well and fine, otherwise you can guess. In the meantime, we move on to what we studied in lecture number 29. In lecture number 29, we learned how to identify various kinds of review. Basically, we wrote a book review in lecture number 29. So we learned that there are different kinds of review. We have a book review, we can have film review, we can have concert review, software review, textbook review. There are lots of different kinds of reviews that we can have. And we learned that basically by review we mean formal assessment, evaluation or analysis of some experience. We also read and analyzed a book review. We actually looked at few examples and we analyzed it for identifying various essential elements of a book review. And in the end, we had a task. You were given a task and you were supposed to write a short book review. So this is what we learned in lecture number 29. Now let's have a quick look at the objectives of today's lecture, lecture number 30, before we go deep into the meat of lecture number 30. After completing lecture number 30, you should be able to identify and interpret visual organizers. That means you should be able to identify various kinds of a variety of visual organizers, and you should also be able to interpret visual organizers. In other words, you will learn the skills to read visual organizers, to find meaning from these visual organizers, to make sense of these. Then you will also learn some techniques to convert visual information into verbal. And during this process, you will learn some common useful expressions for describing various trends, for describing various events, various processes. And finally, you will write short descriptive reports using these visual organizers. But first of all, if you could guess it, the question is, what is a visual organizer? As its name suggests, it is some kind of tool that visually organizes the content. The definition could be that visual organizer or a graphic organizer is a communication tool. So it's a tool to communicate information, and that uses visual symbols, that appeals to our eyes, and it has visual symbols on a piece of paper to express knowledge, concepts, thoughts or ideas and the relationship between them. So basically it expresses two things, the ideas and the relationship between the ideas. And it graphically or visually represents the idea and the relationship between them. Therefore, it gives a clear picture, a clear mental image of the idea and the relationship between various ideas. The main purpose of a visual organizer is to provide a visual aid to facilitate learning and instruction. So from these two words, learning and instruction, I think you should have an idea that how important visual organizers are for teachers. Because for teachers, mainly our task is to engage our learners in the learning process, and ourselves, we are always engaged in the instruction process. So learning and instruction are very key features of our professional lives, and we learn that visual organizers are visual aids to facilitate these two processes. In other words, visual organizer is really very important for us as teachers because the information which is visually or graphically expressed on a piece of paper can help learning in various ways. Okay, now I would like you to think of some common examples of visual organizers. So when you think of the word visual organizer, the phrase visual organizer, and when you go through this definition here, what comes to your mind? Can you give any specific or any particular example of a visual organizer? That's right. A table is a visual organizer, a table of data, a table of contents, for example. Okay, now let's look at some common examples here. Very basic visual organizer is simple outlines. You know, when we are writing a report, when we are writing a paragraph, when we are writing an essay, we usually make an outline first. So if we are writing an argumentative essay, for example, first we write the thesis statement, the argument that we want to present, and then we look at various pros and cons, various points that support that argument. And then for cons, we also find out the ways to refute them. So if there are any opposing arguments against our thesis statement, we look for ways to refute those. So in the outline, we can write thesis statement, we can write pros or supporting ideas, we can write cons or contradictory or conflicting ideas, and finally we can write the conclusion. But outline is not really a completely visual organizer because it is still using words as graphical tools. Of course, written words on a piece of paper are also visual because they enter into our eyes through photons. But by the way, photons are the light cells. So these visual organizers are the organizers that appeal our eyes. And the words written on this piece of paper are also visual in a way, but we will, for our convenience sake, we will differentiate between visual and verbal data because visual data only appeals to the eyes, whereas verbal data addresses some other parts of our brain as well. And verbal data can also be communicated orally through mouth, not necessarily through images. Okay, tables. Tables is another common example of a visual organizer. Very often we present information or data in the form of a table. Very common examples could be a timetable, a schedule, a flight schedule, periodic table, or table of contents in a book. So we can have various kinds of tables in order to present information visually or graphically. Then we have charts. There are different kinds of charts. We'll talk about them in detail later on. We can also use illustrations or diagrams. For example, in children's storybooks, we often have the book illustrators. Book illustrators' job is to illustrate the content of the story. So on one page, maybe there is the written description of the story, and on the other page, there is the visual image or illustration of what goes on in the story. And that helps a child, especially an early reader, to make a connection between the image and the verbal information. So illustrations are really important. We also find illustrations and diagrams in science papers, in our textbooks, things that often explain things, describe things. Publications that describe things often have illustrations and diagrams in them. Similarly, we can think of maps as visual organizers, because maps also provide lots of information in a visual form. There could be different kinds of maps. We can have city maps, we can have country maps, we can have route maps. I mean, there are lots of different ways of presenting information. Then we have graphs, and you know, graphs are very important, especially in mathematics and statistics. But they are important in all kinds of academic documents. In particular, when it comes to research and when it comes to summarizing and analyzing complex data, usually we use graphs in order to show relationship between different kinds of ideas. Okay, now let's look at some kind of visual organizers. There is a long list of visual organizers, and it's not possible for me to go through all of them, and it's not even required. Well, here on the screen you have 6 visual organizers, and I would like you to look at them, and simply by looking at their shapes you should be able to name these visual organizers. What kind of visual organizers are these? So if you just look at this, this one on the left of the screen, top left, what kind of visual organizer is it? You're right, it is a graph. Okay, but now I would like you to think of the specific kind of graph, because you know there are lots of different kinds of graphs. So what kind of graph is it? Yeah, you're right if you said it is a line graph, because here we have a line depicting a change over a period of time. Okay, so this is called a line graph because the changes and the information is presented through a line. You know, graphs can also have dots, and if we join these dots with a line, it gives us an information about the overall trend, the outline, or the overall trend of an experience. So you are right, this is one kind of, this is called line graph. Okay, what about this one? Again, this is a graph, and although this time you don't have these boxes behind it, but we still know it is a graph because of these 2 lines. But this time it's not a line graph. What kind of graph is it? That's right, you are familiar with this kind of graph. It is called bar graph. If you are a fan of if you are a fan of cricket, you watch cricket very much, you know this is how they compare, or how they tell us the run rate in each over, the number of runs scored in each over. usually it is depicted through a bar graph. Okay, this is another common visual organizer. What kind, what's its name? That's right, it is called a pie chart, because usually pie, like an apple pie, is round like this, and you cut it into pieces like the piece of cake here. And normally this kind of chart shows the relative ratio of various elements. Okay, we move on to this one, and what kind of visual organizer is this? Maybe this is difficult to name. It is called Venn diagram, V-E-N-N, Venn diagram. And Venn diagram is actually intersecting circles. Right here we have two intersecting circles, but sometimes you can have more, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it depends. And here we have two different ideas, A and B, and they have a certain area which is similar to both of them. So when two branches of disciplines, of a discipline, they overlap, we usually use a Venn diagram in order to show the relationship between the two. For example, if it is geography and this is politics, here we can have geopolitical discipline. So the ideas that are common to both geography and politics will come in this shaded area, the shared area. Okay, how about this one? Sometimes we use this to make an outline. Did you say graph? Not really, it's not a graph, because you might think that it is in the background you have a graph paper, but it's not a graph. It's called a spidergram or a spider graph. If you want to use the word graph, it is a spider graph or it is a spidergram. I prefer to use the word spidergram because it is like web, like a spider weaves its web. Here it can have one main bubble, and each bubble can have its own, you can say, bubbles attached to it. So one idea divided into 4 different ideas, and then this idea is further divided into separate ideas. This kind of diagram is called spidergram. Okay, how about the next one, this one? And here you see that there are different shapes. There is a rectangle here, there is a diamond shape here, and this one is like an oval, and this one is slightly different. It's a document shape. So these are linked with certain arrows. So what is this? Very good. If you said it is a flow chart, you are right. It's a flow chart, because a flow chart actually shows a process from the beginning till the end. So if a process starts here, it goes through these steps. Okay, and here we have a decision point, and from this decision point, if it is yes, we go to this way. If it is no, we go to this way. Usually these flow charts are used for developing softwares, and in the industry these are used quite often. But in fact, as teachers, you can also use them whenever you want to show a process. Alright, let's look at few more visual organizers, and let me see if you can name them this time. This one is pretty common, and I'm sure most of you will be able to name this visual organizer. You are right, this is a tree diagram. And you know, a tree diagram usually has one main stem and then you have two offshoots here, and these offshoots are further divided into other branches. And so one stem is divided into two branches, and then these branches are divided into further offshoots. And that's why it is called a tree diagram. A tree diagram is usually used to show the hierarchical structure of, let's say, the organizational structure of a company. So at the top you have the chief executive, and under the chief executive, or the general manager, and under the chief executive you have the manager finance, manager sales, manager productions, etc., etc. And under those you can have further hierarchy. Okay, how about this one? This looks like it's a house, it's plan of a house. What's its name? Yeah, this kind of visual organizer is called a floor plan. This kind of visual organizer is called a floor plan. If you said it is a map, well, in English we don't use the word map for a house map. Urdu में हम नक्शा कहते हैं, but in English it is basically a design or a map rather than, a design or a floor plan rather than a map. So it's a plan. You should call it a house plan rather than a house map. And if this plan is detailed, and you make even the plan of how various items or objects are placed inside each room, then it is called a floor plan. This one, by the way, is a 3D floor plan because it is three-dimensional. Okay, how about this one? What is it? Yes, you guessed it right. It is a timeline. So if you teach history, very often it is convenient to show the relationship between various events over a period of time, and they are shown through a timeline. Okay, how about this one? That's right, it is a city map. Probably this was the easiest to figure out. How about this one? Again, an easy one. And that's right, it is a periodic table. So it's one kind of a table. Okay. How about this one? Yeah, this is the famous food triangle. It's a triangle, and it shows the amount of food that we should eat. So at the bottom we have the largest portion. So as we go up this pyramid, the amount reduces. So the food items that are at the bottom, they should be consumed more than this one, and this one should be consumed more than this one, and this one should be consumed more than this one. So this is the like chocolates and these kind of things that we should consume the minimum, and these cereals, barley, etc., these kind of things we should consume the maximum. This is, by the way, called a food pyramid. So sometimes we show ideas in the form of a pyramid. Sometimes we have it in the form of an inverted pyramid when this pyramid is upside down. Anyway, these are some of the visual organizers, and now you have a good idea of what visual organizers are and how important they are in the academic world. But let's look at their importance once again. Well, visual organizers, they are important as a basic literacy skill. I would even go to the extent of saying that if you can't read a visual organizer, you are illiterate. You know, literacy means being able to read an alphabet, whether it is Urdu or English or whichever language it is. But if you can read and write, this essentially it means that you can use a language script. You can use the alphabets or the language script to read and write. So this language script will help you interpret and understand verbal messages. But how about visual messages? There is a lot of information which is conveyed through graphs, which is conveyed visually. So you see, beside the roads, for example, you have plenty of road signs, the traffic signs, for example. So even those people who are illiterate, but they are visually literate if they can interpret those traffic signs. Visual information also is important because it can be communicated across the cultures. And that reminds me, once when I was in China, where I went to teach English, in the beginning I didn't know Chinese at all, and I had to communicate with them in English, but most of the shopkeepers didn't understand English. So sometimes I had to draw things on a piece of paper in order to give them an idea what I wanted. So if I wanted a mushroom, I would draw a mushroom, although my drawing was so pathetic that they would bring an umbrella rather than a mushroom. Okay, so understanding these, how visual information is expressed is like a basic literacy skill. So you can't really overemphasize it. Secondly, it is an important tool for academic reading and writing. You would find that most of the academic books, reports, research papers, textbooks, they contain a lot of illustrations, visual organizers, and normally if you have to write your own reports and research papers, again you have to use these visual organizers quite frequently. So this is an important academic tool, and we have to learn to interpret it, and we have to learn to transfer this visual information into verbal information. So we should be able to convert visual information into verbal information and verbal information into visual information. It's like being able to translate from one language into another language, or translate information from one script into another script. So if visual organizer is an international script, you can translate it into English or translate it into various other languages. As teachers, it is an important tool for addressing multiple intelligences. In the beginning, we used to think, in the past we used to think that there is only one kind of intelligence, and we used to measure the IQ level, and we would say that he is more intelligent than I am. But now we have learnt that there are multiple intelligences. Some people are word smart. That means they are very intelligent with the words. They might not be good at maths, but they are very good at language. So they are linguistically smart. They are word smart. Some are number smart. That means they are very good at maths and numbers and digits. Some people are very good at music. Some people are very good at in doing things like sportsmen, in maintaining their balance, and athletes and acrobats and the gymnasts. They are very good at keeping the balance. And then you have the spatial intelligence. You know, sometimes the builders, the bricklayers, they can have an idea of an enclosed surface, and through their experience they can tell whether something is going to fit in or not. So this means they have the spatial intelligence. They know how to manipulate space. So there are different kinds of intelligences, and our learners, they have multiple intelligences. Some students learn better through words, other students learn better through pictures, yet some other students learn better through actions or activities. Few students learn better through music. It depends. So visual organizers are important because they address multiple intelligences. If we are just giving lectures orally, verbally, the students who are picture smart, they might not be very interested in it, or they might not get a very good idea. On the other hand, if we are just using visual organizers and no verbal information at all, again we are not being fair to our students. So visual organizers are important for various reasons. Okay, now interpreting visual organizers, you might think that it's very easy. You can understand a table, you can understand a graph, but unfortunately we have not learned it formally. Most of us learn these tables, graphs and maps informally, and although we can interpret these tables, but in fact when we are teaching our kids, it is better to teach it formally. For example, in tables, in order to extract information, in order to interpret a table or read a table, we need to know that information is presented horizontally and vertically. Vertically it is called a column, and horizontally it is called a row. So information is presented in columns and rows, and if you have used Excel sheets, you know each box is called one cell. So these columns and rows and various sections and are conventionally used in a table. So in order to extract information from a table, we need to know how this information is organized in columns, in rows, and there are various sections, and there is a table heading, there is a caption, table caption. So these things really help us interpret tables. Similarly, you know, graphs, when we interpret them, we need to be aware of the x-axis and the y-axis. Usually the data is placed over x and y axis, and there is a particular scale. So one cell of a graph, one box of a graph represents maybe 1 kilometer, 1 mile, or 1 hour, or 1 liter, or 1 month, depending on the kind of graph it is. Then in graphs we can also use the color coding. Various colors can indicate various kinds of data. Similarly, maps have their own conventions, and you know the scale, that 1 inch is equal to 1 kilometer, or maybe 1 meter, or maybe 1 foot. It depends. Then there are directions. You know, north is always upwards, south is always downwards. That is the convention that we use in the map. Similarly, we use the legends. The legends are other symbols that we use in the maps. For example, for petroleum, if we are looking at the map of natural resources in Pakistan, for petroleum and oil and gas, we have a symbol of a flame. Similarly, for other natural resources, we have other symbols. Okay, so legend is any encoding and decoding, any symbols that are used in a map. Similarly, you know, flow chart, we looked at a flow chart and we learned that there are various shapes in it. Normally, from where the process starts, it starts with an oval and it ends with an oval. And normally a rectangle is one step of the process, and usually a diamond represents a decision point, where you ask a question, and if the answer to this question is in yes, you follow a different route. If the answer to this decision point is no, you follow a different route. So flow chart have their own conventions. They show us the flow of the process, and this flow is usually shown through arrows, through lines or through arrows. So in order to interpret visual organizers, we need to learn their conventions. Okay, we move on. Now we try to read a table. Here we have two columns. In this column we have a table, and in this column we have got two questions. I want you to focus on this column first. There is a table, and this is the description of the table. The table below shows the average temperature highs and lows in Jamaica each month. Right, so whenever you present information in a table, you should also be able to describe concisely like this. The important thing to note here is that when you are dealing with visual organizers like this, you are really presenting data objectively. You are not showing your personal opinions. The table below shows the average temperature highs and lows in Jamaica. So you see that we have three columns here. The first row here is the table heading, and the remaining rows, they give us the table data. Okay, so we see that one row is for January, second row is for February, third row is for March. So in order to read this table, in order to answer these questions, we will look at these relevant columns and relevant rows. Okay, which month of the year had the highest average daytime temperature in Jamaica? What's the answer? Okay, you are still working. Great, your answer is correct. It is August, because you know, in August we are looking for which month of the year had the highest average daytime. So this is average daytime, and we'll look for the highest, which is 33, and that was in August. What is the difference between the highest average daytime temperature in December and the lowest average nighttime temperature in December? So this time we are just going to look at one row, which is December, and we'll look at highest we will look at average daytime temperature, which is 31, and then we'll look at average nighttime temperature, which is 21, and in order to find the difference, we will take out 21 from 31, and our answer will be 10 degrees centigrades. So this is how we interpret or read a table. In fact, as teachers, it is important. I know that you can read tables very well, but in order to teach these tables to your students, you should specifically give them such tasks so that you can make sure that they can understand these tables by asking certain questions which are based on it. And you can explain it by referring to the main vocabulary like columns, rows, table heading, table description, and the table data in each row. Okay. So this is how we read a table. Now we move on and we look at reading a line graph. How do we read a line graph? So I want you to look at this line graph first. You see we have x-axis and we have y-axis. On x-axis we have days of the week. Okay, so it starts with Monday and it ends with Sunday. So all these vertical lines here, each one of these represents one day of the week. Whereas here you have temperature which is given in centigrade. So we have this line indicates 10 degrees centigrade, 20 degrees centigrade, 30 degrees centigrade, and 40 degrees centigrade. We can now work out the scale ourselves, since there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts in it. So this means that each part gives a difference of 2 degrees centigrade. And then we see that there is a line, okay, that starts somewhere at 18 degrees centigrade and it ends somewhere at 20, just a minute, 224, 26 degrees centigrade. Okay, now can you answer these questions now? Which day was the warmest? You are right. Sunday was the warmest, because in Sunday we have the highest point, the highest temperature. And which day was the coldest? The lowest? Here, 18 degrees centigrade. It was Monday. What was the temperature on Saturday? Temperature on Saturday. So for this you need to draw a line. The line is already drawn, and you will drop a line from here to here, and you will see that it is somewhat like 25 degrees centigrade. Okay, when was the biggest change in temperature? The biggest change in temperature. You are right. So if you just look at the line, and earlier I told you that this line represents the overall trend. Trend means it shows us the nature of change. Temperature is changing every day, but this line shows us that it is going upwards. So it is showing us a trend, that there is a change in the increase of temperature. Okay. And here the rise is steeper than anywhere else. So we would say that the biggest change in temperature was, well, not between Saturday and Sunday. I would say it is between Friday and Saturday, because the difference between this point and this point is like 4 degrees. Okay, so the right answer is not Saturday and Sunday, it's between Friday and Saturday. Okay, so now you have learnt how to read a line graph. We move on, and now we learn how to read a bar graph. You remember the bar graph? Okay, great. But in order to read a bar graph, I'm going to show you a video clip And this video clip is, by the way, taken from Khan Academy. And as teachers, I think it is a very good resource for all of us. Khan Academy actually has lots of learning material. It is like a storehouse of video lectures, and these video lectures are recorded video lectures are available for free, and they are in various subjects. So if you teach chemistry, physics, biology, English, history, maths, you would find that there are plenty of video lectures available for free. Actually, I use some of these video lectures in my 9th, 10th classes, in my first year and second year classes, because they are exactly based on their textbooks. Okay, now I'm going to show you this video clip. Are you ready? Great. So here is the video clip.
Based on the data below, which student score improved the most between the midterm and final exams? And so they give us this data in terms of a bar graph for each student. We actually have two bars that show the midterm in blue and then the final exam in red. And they tell us that here, midterm in blue and final exam. And sometimes this is called a two-column bar graph because for each student here you have two columns of data. So if you were to actually look at the data itself, you have the midterm data and then you have the final exam data. Now, they're asking us which student score improved the most between the midterms and the final exams. So if we look at Jasmine right over here, might as well start with her since she's the most to the left. It looks like she definitely did improve from the midterm to the final. It looks like in the midterm, if I had to guess, this looks like about a, I don't know, it looks like she got maybe about a 72 or 73 on the midterm. I'm just guessing because I don't know the exact number. And then it looks like on the final she got, I don't know, that looks like maybe a 77 or 78. Approximately. So she improved a little bit, about 5 points from the midterm to the final. The way that they've given us this information, we don't know the exact numbers because it's not super precise in terms of marking off the bars, but hopefully it'll become obvious when we look through everyone's scores. Let's look at Jeff. So Jeff actually did worse from the midterm to the final exam. He got looks like over an 85 on the midterm, and then on the final he got about an 84 or 85. So he actually went down. So it's definitely not Jeff. He definitely did not improve the most. He actually went down. Next, if you think about Nevin, it looks like Nevin actually improved about the same amount as Jasmine. On both scores, I don't know if Nevin is a boy or a girl's name, this person on both tests, this person did better than Jasmine, but it looks like the actual improvement's about the same. Looks like they went from about an 83 to, I don't know, about an 88. I'm just estimating it, just trying to look at this axis right over there and estimating what those scores are. So Nevin and Jasmine right now, based on the three we've seen, are tied for the lead. Now let's look at Alejandra. Now Alejandra, this is, okay, so this jumps out. She definitely improved dramatically from the midterm to the final exam. It looks like on the midterm she maybe got an 81 or an 82. So maybe this was an 82 she got on the midterm, and then on the final it looks like she got about a 95. A 95 on the final. So it's dramatic improvement. So right now Alejandra is the leading contender for most improved from the midterm to the final. And then finally Marta, right over here, it looks like she actually got worse from the midterm to the final. She scored in the mid-90s in the midterm and then low 90s in the final. So she's definitely not the most improved. So the winner here is Alejandra. Alejandra is the most improved between the midterm and the final exam.
Okay, now I'm going to give you a writing task now. Here you have a line graph. And the line graph below shows changes in the amount and type of fast food consumed by Australian teenagers from 1975 to 2000. And this time you don't have just one line. Actually, you have 3 lines. And here you have a legend. According to the legend, the color codes for hamburgers, we have green line, the red line is for fish and chips, and the blue line indicates pizza. Okay, and here we have number of items eaten per year, 20 items, 40 items, and 120 items. So we have a difference of 20 items between these lines. And here we have, on x-axis, we have years from 1975 to 2000. And you see, here you have one sentence that describes it. This is the title of the graph, and vertically we have number of items per year, or you can say presented on the y-axis we have number of items eaten per year, and on x-axis we have a period of time ranging from 1975 to 2000. So this shows changes in the amount and type of fast food. Now you are going to write a descriptive report in no less than 150 words, and you are going to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So if you just look at the trends, the outline, I think one thing which is really very noticeable, and you would definitely include it in your summary, is that if you just look at this fish and chips, it dropped dramatically. It started from 100 items in 1975, but in 2000 it dropped to less than 40 items. So this means that fish and chips are fish and chips are less consumed over a number of years. On the other hand, both this pizza and hamburgers, they have increased quite a lot, right? So you are going to describe these changes, this trend, in the form of a paragraph. And remember that it's not easy. You'll have to write maybe 2-3 drafts before it is before you can finalize it. And remember that you use at least 150 words. So you are going to report the main features, and you are also going to make comparisons. So there is a comparison between fish and chips and hamburgers. So what kind of statement you can use? All right, now I'm going to show you the model answer to this writing task 1. In fact, I have taken this writing task 1 from IELTS test, International English Language Testing System. You know, IELTS is a standardized English test which is accepted in many parts of the world. And in IELTS, they often test you, test your skill of converting visual information into verbal information, because in the academic world, it is really an important skill. So I've taken this writing task 1 from IELTS, and here is one model answer to this task. The line graph illustrates the amount of fast food consumed by teenagers in Australia between 1975 and 2000, a period of 25 years. So you'll see the first sentence is actually the description of this graph. It begins with identification of the kind of graph or visual organizer it is. So what kind of visual organizer it is? It is called a line graph. And what does it illustrate? What does it explain? It explains the amount of fast food consumed by teenagers in Australia. And it is delimited between 1975 and 2000. Usually, you would have to limit this topic. So if you just say fast food consumed by teenagers, it is very generic. You have to be limited by saying teenagers in Australia, and between the year 1975 to 2000, over a period of just 25 years. So the first sentence actually identifies what kind of visual organizer it is, and it gives a description, a precise, concise description of this graph. And then in the second sentence you have the overall trend. Okay, so overall trend is that consumption of fish and chips declined over the period, whereas the consumption of pizza and hamburgers, their consumption increased. So you see, basically in this answer, in this short descriptive report, you have got 3 paragraphs. In the first paragraph you have one sentence which gives the description, and the second paragraph gives the summary or the overall trend. Okay, whereas these 2 paragraphs they describe the details. Okay, so we have in sharp contrast to this is a cohesive device, and this signpost tells us what's the relationship between these 2 paragraphs. So these are 2 opposing paragraphs. In 1975, the most popular food item was fish and chips among the teenagers in Australia, but it dropped, and it dropped only to 40 times per year. Whereas, or in sharp contrast to this, the teenagers started eating hamburgers and pizza more than fish and chips. Okay, so you can show this trend, you can report this trend in 3 paragraphs, just like this model answer. Okay, now I want you to give another I want to give you another writing task, and but before that let's have a quick look at the vocabulary which is used for describing these trends. You can use a noun, and you can say that there is a rise when something increases. You can use the word increase, you can use the word rise, you can use the word surge. Surge also means increase. Growth, peak is the highest point, fluctuation is going up and coming down, variation is also going up and down. A period of stability means that it is flat, the line is flat, horizontal. Plateau also means that it goes up and then it is like plain or flat for some period of time. Fall is when it is dropping, decrease, decline, and dip. So these are the, so basically for rise we can use these 4: rise, increase, surge, and growth. For the highest point we can use peak. For variety we use fluctuation and variation. For stability we use stability and plateau, and the last 4 are used for showing drop in the trend. I have provided this vocabulary list as a handout, so you can download it from the handout section. Okay, similarly you can use the verbs rise, increase, surge, grow, peak, and you would find skyrocket is the sudden increase, fluctuate, vary, fall, decrease, decline. Plunge is the sudden dive. Then you can use these phrases to show an upward trend. So you can say that fish and chips, they have shown an upward trend. Fish and chips have shown a downward trend, whereas pizza and hamburger have shown an upward trend. Okay, you can say it has hit the highest point. Hit means reached the highest point. It has hit the lowest point. It hit the lowest point in for example, you can say that fish and chips hit the lowest point in 2000, or pizza, it reached a peak in, and then you can give the number. So you can use these these phrases. It fluctuates wildly without any regular pattern. Okay, Flatten out means level off. It means it is a plateau. So these are some very common phrases that are used when you are writing such descriptive reports. And if you use these words and phrases, your report would look really professional. Okay, similarly you can use certain adverbs like the increase, or you can say the fish and chips decreased sharply, suddenly, rapidly, abruptly, dramatically, significantly. All these have the same meaning. Steadily means gradually, step by step. Considerably means to a great extent. Markedly means quite considerably. It means the same. Slightly means only lightly. Gently, slightly means. Gradually is the same as gradually means step by step. And wildly means without any pattern. Similarly, you can use these as adjectives. Okay. So these words and phrases are really important because they can help you write good formal English, good formal reports. Okay, now here you have writing task 2, and this time there is not a line graph. This time you have 2 bar graphs, and the bar charts below give information about the railway system in 6 cities in Europe. You are going to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features, and you are going to make comparisons where relevant. So this first bar graph is about kilometers of route, and the second one is about passengers per year in millions. Okay, so in kilometers for use, you have kilometers here, and here you have the names of various cities in Europe. Whereas here you have the number of passengers in millions, 500 millions, 1000 million, and you have the cities displayed on the x-axis, and you have the cities represented on x-axis. Now you are going to summarize the information just like before, and this time you are going to compare not within one graph, rather you are going to compare, make comparisons between the 2 graphs. Okay, now I'm going to show you the model answer for this, and this time you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, and I give you some time to go through this. So what you can do is you can pause this video and you can read it, and you can try to analyze it on your own. Okay, like before, the first paragraph actually describes, it gives us the name, that what kind of chart is it? A bar chart or a bar graph, and it gives us the description. The second paragraph gives us the overview or the summary. The third paragraph deals with ages, so it describes changes with reference to the ages, whereas the fourth paragraph describes changes with reference to the size of the cities, and the last paragraph it describes with relation to number of people. Okay, so these are 2 examples. You can follow this. Each paragraph should be a separate unit like this here, and there should be no personal opinion, no addition. You should strictly follow the visual information and transfer it verbally. In fact, sometimes you have to describe this information orally when, for example, delivering a presentation. Okay, now here is a practice situation. I'll provide this as a handout so that you can download it, and you can look at this bar graph here, and this bar chart shows the number of visitors to 3 London museums between 2007 and 2012. You are going to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. And you are going to write your report, short descriptive report, in more than 150 words. Okay, so please write a short descriptive report following this practice situation. And with this, we come to the end of this lecture. Now we have a quick look at the summary of lecture 30. In lecture number 30, we learned how to identify and interpret visual organizers. We learned how to convert visual information into verbal information, both orally or in written form. We also learned some common vocabulary items, some phrases in order to describe various trends. And finally, you looked at 2 models for describing such visual organizers, and you are given a task to write such a report yourself. Hope lecture 30 has been really informative and useful. Lecture 30 is also the last lecture in terms of the fresh content, because in lecture 31 and 32 we are merely going to revise the contents of whatever we studied in earlier lectures. So lecture 30 is in a way the last lecture as far as the main contents of this course are concerned. So you deserve congratulations. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again in the next coming lectures.